All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to this afternoon's panel on affordable food. My name is Martha Dragich. I'm your moderator this afternoon. Let me ask, is the sound level right? Okay, more? I now know how to do this. It's my only technical skill. So this is the second in a series of 5 panels relating broadly to food. These programs are supported by a grant from Mizzou Advantage pursuant to MU's strategic initiative around food for the future. As you know, Mizzou Advantage encourages interdisciplinary collaborations, and so a group of people from many, many departments on campus have been getting together for, I don't know, a year or 2 years, I'm not sure, to talk about the future of our food system. And it was hard to even know where to get started with that. So somebody suggested that we start with some ideas developed in a project funded by the Kellogg Foundation, which asked the question, what is good food? That's what we want in the from the food system of the future, right, for ourselves and for the world. So this Kellogg project suggested that the key attributes of good food are that it is healthy, affordable, fair, and green. So we thought, okay, that's a place to start. And so we have now decided to try to convene panels on each one of those topics. So last week we had a panel about healthy food. Today's panel is about affordable food. The next 2 Tuesdays will cover fair and green. And then the final Tuesday, so now we're up to October 22nd, will be a wrap-up, which is still in the envisioning process, what that will look like. But to try to figure out what we've learned from these panels. So, okay, we've got these attributes, healthy, affordable, fair, and green. That still doesn't get us very far because those terms are all contested. They mean different things. They're understood differently by people coming at it from different disciplines, participating in the food system in different ways. So the purpose of these panels is to try to figure out, for instance, talking about affordable food, where do we have common understanding, shared understandings of what that means or what factors should be taken into account in determining what is affordable food. So where do we have common understanding? Where are there gaps that maybe no discipline has really investigated yet? Where do we have areas of disagreement about what should be considered or not considered or how we should approach the topic? And so we hope then to use that information that is generated from the discussions of our panelists and the questions and answers that we engage in, try to figure out areas that would be fruitful for future research that would lead to innovations in teaching and new outreach and public service kinds of activities. So that's what we hope to do. Now there's a very important part of that that we hope you will do, help us accomplish, and that is first and foremost, I suppose, to ask questions, engage in that question and answer process, but also if you would kindly take that handout that you picked up on the way in, that Mary is waving around, and jot down comments, questions that you didn't get a chance to ask, ideas that aren't maybe fully formed enough to even articulate a question at this point, whatever it is that you can record on that form and then turn it in as you leave, that will be enormously helpful to us in trying to gather something from what we've done here today. All right. So just a couple of things before we get underway. Before I introduce today's panel, I'd like to mention briefly the people who have organized this series, this effort. The planning committee for the project as a whole is led by Mary Hendrickson and Donna Murley. Other members on that group are Debbie Kelly, Luann Roth, Cindy DeBlau, Luis Oxenia, Ray Massey, and Joe Dalgano. And then the group organizing today's panel in particular includes Debbie Kelly, Cindy DeBlau, Donna Murley, and Joe Dalgano. So here's our format for today. We have 5 panelists. We've asked them to do a very rapid-fire kind of delivery. If you were with us last week, you saw the same kind of a format. Each panelist will speak for no more than about 7 minutes, and I'm going to be a tough enforcer. And they're going to use PowerPoint slides to some extent, starting with a definition for each panelist of what that panelist considers to be affordable food. So we'll have each panelist talk for about 7 minutes, offering that definition, elaborating on it to the extent that they can in that very brief time, and then we'll save about 25 minutes at least for questions and answers between the audience and panelists. And we will have refreshments. They will be available today at the end of the session. So let me introduce today's panelists in the order that they will speak, and I'm going to say no more than the name and affiliation of the person, and I'll ask each panelist then to repeat his or her identification at the beginning of the presentation. So we'll start with Jerry Nelson, Professor Emeritus of Agronomy and Plant Sciences, followed by Charlie Hopper, Marketing Specialist with the Missouri Department of Agriculture, Scott Brown, Research Assistant Professor in Agriculture Applied Economics, then Sandy Raccoon, Curator's Professor of Rural Sociology, and Debbie Kelly of Ag Extension, Food Science, and Nutrition. Jerry?
Martha, I apologize. We have a little change in the order. Scott is speaking second and Charlie is speaking third.
Fair enough. Thanks.
Thank you, Martha. As she said, my name is Jerry Nelson, and I've been on the faculty here for more than 40 years, and have been retired for the last few, and my office is in Curtis Hall. You see the email and telephone number. I've traveled extensively internationally over the last few years, and I want to give you a bit of an update on some things because affordability is an international issue, and obviously international affordability affects affordability in the U.S. They asked to define what affordability really means, and I said that it's food that is available and priced so it is consistent with household income. And it goes on a little bit about cultural and social factors, because I find that in places like the U.S. and others, it's a function of income, and that's basically around the world. But as the income goes up, then the people's choices change, and that's the part that I want to emphasize a little bit later in this discussion. An international dimension, it makes a lot of difference whether the people live on a farm or they live in an urban area. It's the same way here, but in a different perspective, and I wanted to come back to that in a few minutes. The subsistence farmer, which is basically a very strong component of the social structures in most developing countries, is a farmer who barely gets by. His main job is to grow food as much as he can at a low price as he can to keep, because he does not have very much income, in order to keep his family fed. The non-farmer, the urban person, is dependent on another set of features. A lot of time it's imported food or excess from the subsistence farmer or from those farms in the country that are able to produce enough to keep themselves fed and market some. I want to do a comparative analysis briefly for you with Kenya, which is a country in East Central Africa, Vietnam, which is a rapidly growing country in Southeast Asia, and North Korea, which is a rapidly deteriorating country in Northeast Asia. I want to look a little bit at the ratio of rural income to urban incomes and what criteria to compare. And I think the same things would hold in the U.S. as far as that's concerned. The educational level of the rural people, their access to technology, infrastructure, birth rate, and incentives to increase production, which is one way that the farmer or the rural person can get out of poverty. If we look at a little bit at this, we should first of all ask a question. And you could ask that same question in the U.S. And whether we're a capitalistic society or socialistic society today, I can't tell you. All I know is the government is not working. But if you look at the system in the government of capitalistic, as far as the government is concerned in the economy, you see three distinctions. Kenya is capitalistic in both senses. Vietnam is a socialistic government with a capitalistic economy. And North Korea has a socialistic government and a socialistic economy. So it's an interesting approach, whether it's bottom up in terms of supply and demand or if it's top down in terms of government policies that dictate the amount of food that can be produced. Now, indirectly, the same thing happens here and in every other country through policies, et cetera, and they're going to discuss a bit more about that. One thing that really helps in increasing the income of the people is access to foreign investment and particularly giving jobs. That generally improves the income of the urban people in developing countries. But that means there's more demand then for food. And if that doesn't trickle down, another characteristic of governments, the farmer doesn't really get much benefit. And so there needs to be policies in there that will affect that. So what do we look at? Land ownership is a very important thing because it gives the farmer some collateral for loans so he can increase his income from that subsistence agriculture in order to make things go fast enough and enough that he can get his production up so he can actually market some. So loans and those access to capital is very, very critical. Now we can look at other things, educational level of the rural people. And now you see what's happening. Both Kenya and North Korea have a relatively low education level, in contrast to Vietnam, which has a very high education level. Now with that, they're going to adopt technology much faster, and that's something we need to be concerned about with our producers here, as well as the people who are buying the food. Access to technology, notice the relationship. No wonder Vietnam is growing so rapidly, whereas Kenya has other challenges as well as North Korea. Infrastructure is very, very important. Markets and so on. A very low infrastructure in Kenya. A lot of the food is actually not sold, it's actually bartered in the rural areas and from subsistence agriculture. So it makes a big difference in what's happening. Markets have been developed in Vietnam. There's no question there's a market in North Korea because the government will take everything it can get. Children per family, there's a strong correlation between income increasing and family size decreasing. So anything we can do to increase the income is going to help with that issue as well. And the incentives to increase production. There's not very much incentive if there's no way to market it or deal with it in certain countries, but it's very low in North Korea, in fact. The people actually use it as a disincentive. Well, you can look at the gross national product, and one of the things that happens as the GNP goes up, oftentimes the desire of certain types of food changes. And I think the same thing occurs here, so that it doesn't take very long, and when the incomes go up, and particularly evidenced by China, they soon switch to a meat-based diet and have a different approach towards the whole food system. Well, the summary is affordability is different among populations within the population. And the lower people are generally the ones that are having the most difficulty, obviously. It's interesting to note in Japan, for example, that the rice production is actually decreasing because what's happening is that they're eating less rice, but they're eating a higher quality of rice. And so the farmers will actually grow a rice variety that's lower in yield but higher in quality because it'll demand a higher market price. Well, what does that do to availability? We start getting conflicts between the high-income people and what they can afford and what the lower-income people can produce and technically afford. The policies on land tenure I've talked about, the market and distribution structure. It's frustrating to drive through the rural areas of Kenya and see the women walking to the market with a bag of corn on one side and maybe something else on the other. They sit there and they trade around, a very little bit is sold, and they go back. But what are the dietary implications of that type of an agriculture? What are the people really eating that's healthy and in terms of their longevity and their lifestyle? Education is absolutely critical. And again, I can't go into that enough because it not only affects the opportunities for application of technology, but opportunities for children to escape this type of an environment. It's not universal in what to improve. Every country is different. And I would dare say, and Mary and other people in here will tell you, every community in the US is different. They're going to react because of social issues and cultural issues differently. So as we look at affordability, it's a big, big problem. We have to dissect at the social level before we can even start to think about the technological levels. Once we've understood those things, then we start to develop the specific strategy that can be the most benefit. And I'm looking forward to hearing from some of the other panelists so I can get ideas on how I can develop strategies and more effectively on the international front.
So good afternoon, Scott Brown. I'm with Department of Agricultural Economics. I do a lot of work with U.S. Congress as I try to write farm policy. My particular area especially is really dairy policy. I'm not very busy today. I hope that joke we don't have to continue to tell for the next several weeks and we can actually move forward. But I was glad to see Dr. Nelson have a little bit of an economist slant to his definition of affordability. As I started thinking about this presentation this afternoon, I actually went, sorry, I did think about it before this afternoon, little joke as well. So the Global Food Security Index, put together by the Economist Intelligence Unit, it was a DuPont-sponsored activity about 3 years ago now as a way to globally define affordability. Now they look at an overall Global Food Security Index. I just wanted to pull out what they talk about in terms of affordability. So, measures the ability of consumers to purchase food. I go, that's the very direct connection between income and ability to purchase food. But it goes a little further than that, I think. Number one, we've seen a lot of volatility, and depending on where you are in the globe, you've seen a lot more volatility as consumers in the marketplace. So how well does the system actually help with the volatility side? Do we offer any kind of programs to help consumers through those shocks? I tend to go SNAP program in the United States. Just one example of, I think, programs that are really meant to help during periods of shock. So you're going to find me as an economist following that economist definition and really, again, saying much of this has to do with levels of income in terms of your ability to afford food. So I wanted to look a little bit further at how this group defined affordability. So we need to measure this. And this is where I think, we have a lot of different ideas of how do you measure affordability. I'm not going to say, this is one size fits all, but their approach globally. And so if you look at the column towards the right-hand side, you'll see roughly about 20% in those first three categories of the affordability index. So again, I go food consumption as a share of consumer expenditure. So what percentage of that income goes to food is 20%. Proportion of the population under the poverty line gets another 20% of that index. Gross domestic product per cap, and then the last three. So what are countries doing in terms of import tariffs? Do they keep food out? Do they have very high tariffs that affect consumers? What kind of food safety net programs are in place in those countries? And then equally important, what are they doing for their own production within that country to ensure domestic production can grow? So do they have financing available? And so that's the definition they've used and the data they're looking at to look at affordability. So I always go, as economists, I need a few very complicated graphs to make some simple points. So my first one, so first of all, affordability index on the left-hand axis or the vertical axis, percentage of food consumption as a percentage of consumer expenditure. So my graph up in the upper right-hand corner starts to show the regions of the world. So brown, for example, kind of being North America. I think you'll see the United States quickly showing on the upper left-hand corner. So food very affordable and a small percentage of consumer expenditure spent on food in the United States. You can look as we go around the world. We tend to see North America, Europe generally, then we move into Asia, Africa, as we go from the share of consumer expenditures spent on food. Now, these circles are very interesting to me. So if I look at the United States, for example, it doesn't say it's 100. There's some white area. So I look at the circle and I go, the brown area means to represent what proportion of that population sees affordability. But it's not 100% by any stretch. So how do you deal with that outer white ring? I think that's important as we think about how this definition changes as we go around the world. And certainly you can look at the big circles in the middle. I'm sure it's hard for you to guess. Those might be China and India, for example, very large populations. They sit in the middle. There's still a fairly large white area to those rings as well. So the definition does definitely change as you move around. Undernourishment. So again, I've given you undernourishment on the horizontal axis and the overall index score on the right going, these are very nicely correlated. Not 100% by any stretch, but very nicely correlated. You got a lot of folks, even in the United States, who isn't at zero in terms of undernourishment as measured by FAO in this case is the data that was used. So certainly issues for all of us left to deal with. I wanted just to go down maybe a little different road as I spin into the U.S. I think about commodity production and local production, and I don't really want to get down the actual production itself. I want to talk about processing. I think there's some important things for us to think about from a United States perspective. I think commodity production, and so I'm going to talk about this as commodity and local. I'm going to really focus on the processing aspect of that. I would say commodity is driven by large economies of scale. As we have very large processing facilities in this country, they tend to produce products more cheaply than perhaps local production, but we don't have that direct link between producers and consumers in that kind of processing strategy. I think there is consumers who gain utility from that local effort and are willing to pay for it. I think that it's hard to see with the higher processing costs that local food movement providing as much help in terms of global affordability. There may be points in time where different parts of the country may see something. And I do think these different things will coexist in the United States. So just two really quick examples, both from the Economic Research Service of USDA. This one actually compares beef chain supply cost differences. The top being the local one, and I kind of focus on the next to right-hand column where we're looking at cost. I make your eye go down about midway. What's the average price of grass-fed beef from a local system? USDA has estimated that back in 2010 at about $8 a pound. And you see the commodity section below, same column, go to the bottom, 465, a difference of 335 in terms of costs of those different systems. I think that says something about affordability in front of us. And when you think about that actual processing, so we may have a lot of differences about which is better from a production standpoint, those processing sides are very similar in terms of the product that we're going to turn out at the end of the day. Fluid milk is another great example. So here's one from Washington, D.C., and sorry, it may get a little too small. So actual survey work of different systems. The left-hand side is what they've dubbed mainstream. So Maryland, Virginia Co-op is going to give us about 1.7 million gallons of milk into that market in a given week. The middle one, which is a direct marketer, is about 5,000 gallons a week. And the right-hand side one, that's a intermediated kind of strategy, is about 1,000 gallons a week. It's an organic operation. If I go to the bottom of those, $1.99 is the retail value of mainstream. The middle one, $3.25, and the intermediated one, $3.29. So very different prices in terms of those different ways to get milk to the market. I think we need to continue to focus on that from a processing side. And again, I do think food affordability definition differs a lot as you ask different people. I think you can't ignore economies of scale that we have going on in terms of global affordability. I think that we're certainly going to have a situation where local or I dub them hybrid systems have a place. But if we're going to continue to feed a growing global population, we have to invest in technology. Thanks.
My name is Charlie Hopper, and I'm with the Missouri Department of Agriculture. I know some faces here, a lot I don't. My job, I'm actually technically a marketing specialist. I work with growers, producers, communities, markets, processors, distributors, everybody in between to try to figure out really just how to grow the economy as a whole and to create jobs and get businesses off the ground. I approach it very similar to these guys in terms of a total economic approach, but a little broader. My particular view is community-based because I work with people at the farm level, to the town level, all the way to the state level. I typically don't go outside of the state with my work, so I tend to have it a little more focused here, but I have to look at it in terms of the whole world and in terms of the whole country. I have to admit, I'm probably the only guy on here that doesn't have an ag or an econ degree. I have a philosophy degree, so that's the answer you're getting. I tend to view the economy as a whole. I think, anybody see what the stock market was doing last week? Anybody? No, last week. I mean, we hit the record high last week, the highest it's ever been. Anybody talking about how great the economy was doing? I guess my concern is oftentimes we confuse the economy with the economics. The economy is actually the whole. It's the resources, the community we view it in, and the ecology, the actual life between everything that's going on in there. I think both these guys alluded to that a little bit. And the economics are the transactions that occur within them. So I have to deal a lot with those individual transactions. That's how I connect with the people I do. But if they don't grow all those different aspects, I'm not really growing the whole economy. You know, our gross production is up, but at the same time, we're still dealing with all these social issues and these community issues as these guys both addressed. So I also like to look at it from kind of the laws of nature drive the laws of the economy, because we have to have the resources to do what we're going to do. So I focus a lot on the conservation of energy, conservation of matter, and the necessity of agents of change. So energy and matter are constants. That's all we got to work with. We only have so much land, so much soil, so much things that we do. Energy we can't create. We have what comes from the sun, and we have what we have to work with. But it does change forms. It becomes a solid, a liquid, or gas. It gets out of our life cycle to where we can't use it, and it kind of really drives the price of everything else. And the necessities of agents of change is that everything in this system that we're working with, the matter and the energy, can't change by itself. Something else has to change it, something in a living system. And then we have the action-reaction principles. So in agriculture, we deal with the Earth's economy. And that's really how I like to look at this. Mind you, too, I have a strategic job. One of my things is to find common ground amongst all these different people with different interests. So I try to find this really base level to make people think about it. We deal with the carbon cycle. All the energy we have in our system comes through plants, falls into the soil, or is eaten by animals, and falls into the soil, and is turned into this system of what we call life. If the Earth harvests more energy from the sun than we consume as animals, it gets banked in the soil as fossil fuel. Anybody know where oil comes from? It's plants. It's an agricultural byproduct. So all the energy that we use in this fossil fuel economy is actually an agricultural byproduct from a time that we consume less than the Earth harvested. So, and then we mine it out when we use more. So I like to think of agriculture as the stewardship of the Earth's economy. And when I think about what's affordable, I'm thinking about it on a much broader basis. And I think people can look at this individually, but it is a much broader scheme of things. What's that represent? Money. What are we paying for? Anybody? I'm not going to keep asking questions because I'll go by my 7 minutes. But the bottom line is it's energy. Even if we're buying matter, if we're buying some product that we've made or something else, we're not really buying that stuff. We're buying the energy to bring that stuff to us. Money is energy. Everything in our economy is energy. And the very basis of our energy economy is the food that we eat. It's what allows us to do what we do. There's only so much sun, so much soil, so much energy on the earth to use. And the life on this planet has to maintain an equilibrium from a biological standpoint. The question is, as these guys both pointed out, there's gaps in that system, and there's separations sociologically and economically on how people can access it. So, and that's where we get into what affordability really means. Cost versus price. Price is what we pay. I'm not quite sure where you got the beef numbers, but I'm guessing those are price, because I know I can produce grass-fed beef for less than $8. But the bottom line is, this is what a person can afford. You can have all you want in terms of cost that it takes to produce that product. If the consumer can't pay for it, you have to incur all these other things that goes against it. So money, time, resources, the ecology, and the community, all this relates to affordability. But all these are absolute. When we go beyond what we can pay for it, we're deficit spending in one way or another. What is value? Value is the personal principles that we use to determine what costs we will incur for the price that we pay. How much are we willing to give up? You know, we have extrinsic versus intrinsic. Intrinsic is probably the only thing that's absolute. Supply versus demand, which is basically energy and matter. Want versus need, which has to do with energy and matter supply. And personal versus social. You know, these are absolutely subjective at the end. Time and time again, we'll find that we often pay more for social than social. The bottom line is values are subjective, and they're what determines what we'll pay. Food is energy. Right now, we use 10 calories of energy to produce 1 calorie of human food. Peak energy, supposedly, we've used half the known energy sources on this planet. Price is going to start going up. We know the energy is stored in matter, so where's the matter going? Erosion, we lose 10 times the soil. We lose soil 10 times faster than it's replaced. 37,000 miles of cropland a year. $36 billion in production, and 2 inches of topsoil per winter. By the way, all these numbers are from the USDA or ERS. And matter is lost, energy is lost. That's E equals MC squared. That's what that means. Energy is in matter. Now, how do we pay for this? If we had to do this, if we had to pay for this, and there was a deficit somewhere, our income percent spent on food since 1960 has gone down 50%. Percentage of the retail dollar down 50. Percentage of farm income's down 75. Total farm employment's down 95. And I know that we've had a lot of technology that's made this happen. But at the same time, we've had to pay for it somehow. Brought populations down. It wasn't by going to work for manufacturing jobs, because they went down too. Percentage of all service jobs went up 50%. That's energy. Production expenses went up 80%. The number I was trying to grab on the Ag Census site tonight, which of course is shut down, was that we're having record prices for grains again, but we're actually at a record low income, once again, for grain producers. Production expenses are up 80%, farm debt's up 70, and household debt's up 100. This is all in an energy cycle. What's affordable? We can't just look at it in terms of what's in our pockets. It's part of it, but we have to look at all 3 pillars of it. And of course, as eaters, we have a say in that. So, there's agents of change. We have plants that change the sunlight, cows, or animals that eat the plants, and ourselves.